So this is lab 1. You will see there are 3 parts. Part 1, we start off just talking about sig figs, which you have learned in lecture. And then we go on into measuring density and calculating it and identifying a substance from there. And then we follow up with some questions about uncertainty. So it's made to go in order. So I would not recommend skipping around and, trying to answer this and not that. Just go in order. So part 1, I think we're good on that one. What do y'all have any questions on part 1? That one's pretty straightforward, right? Part 2 is where we start getting into some measurements, making a graph, taking those measurements down, making a table. So how are we going to go about this? Because actually the rest of the lab is dependent on part 2. So like all the questions in part 2 is dependent on this first, and then part 3 is kind of following up. So what you're doing in this lab, in this part, is you are observing these measurements that are happening, right? And if you need a short demo on how to use the pivot player, just click this, right? It just shows you how to change what you're watching and then, pause and start and whatever. But what you're doing here is you're watching the video, recording the mass and volume at 5 different points. So you are being a little scientist and writing down what was measured. So these tables are interactive tables. They're not just they don't just populate by themselves. You're doing that, okay? So you're taking those measurements. So in this first column, I could name it mass of, fluid 1. This is very very up to you. You can decide what to exactly write in there in the column. But for the units and the variable, units important. So let's say grams. Variable, I think it's saying mass. But anyway, you can say mass, column name, volume, units, ml, right? Oops. Oh my God, there we go. Volume. All right, so you got those ready for you to measure. So this is liquid 1, right? So it starts off with you placing the graduated cylinder there. Now notice that the graduated cylinder has a mass, right? It's not just weighing nothing, right? There is a feature on the scale for you to tare it, which means to zero it out once you put that. And that way the mass of your graduated cylinder is not taken into account in the later measurements, right? It zeroes it out. This is not what was done here because I think this is purposeful so that you learn how to do this. So notice that the graduated cylinder is 96.4 grams. So you can write that down somewhere. Take note of that. And then they start adding in the liquid, right? And there's your first measurement. So you can pause it. So notice that there is a measurement for volume here. There's a measurement for mass here. So those are the 2 things you have to record. I'm not going to record it. You can do that. But remember to measure at the meniscus, right? Not at the highest point over here. The meniscus, which is, it's like a little smile line, the lowest part. And then the mass over here. So take note of both of those. And then it kind of gives you some time while you're writing that down. And then there's another measurement. You're adding more liquid of the same liquid in. So then you pause it again, take your measurement again, and so on. Do y'all get the point of that? Right? Straightforward. Now, you're going to do this for all 5 measurements for liquid 1. And then you're going to go to liquid 2, load it in. It's going to do the exact same thing. Okay? Now, Oh, and you're gonna add in more columns for liquid 2, the mass, and the volume. So total, once you're done watching the video, taking those 5 measurements for each liquid, you're gonna have 4 columns so far. Okay, now you're not done yet. So once you're done with those 4 columns of raw measurements, you are going to, so like it says here, after collecting mass and volume data, the 4 columns, you are going to add in 2 more columns. Those 2 more columns, and let me delete this because it's bugging me. So you're gonna have this, you're gonna have the 4, you're gonna insert a column, and this is actually gonna be a special column. So this is gonna be, I think they called it fluid mass. Oh, this should, you can just call this regular mass because it includes the graduated cylinder. This right here is going to be your special one called fluid mass, because this one you're going to subtract out by entering column formula. You're going to subtract out the mass of the graduated cylinder. So remember I said take a note somewhere of how much the graduated cylinder weighed. You're going to take the mass. Oops. Oh, God dang it. Change column formula, mass, subtract away, I don't know how much it was. I'm gonna make something up. 90.5. It was something like that. But anyway, you're gonna look up the actual one, and you can click submit, and it's gonna populate all those masses for you. And this is the mass of the fluid by itself, taking out the mass of the graduated cylinder. And this is important because you're trying to get the density of the liquid, of the fluid, not the graduated cylinder, right? That's affecting it. It's going to make your density way higher than it's supposed to be. Okay, so what you're going to end up with, you're going to do this for both fluid 1 and fluid 2. What you're going to end up with is 6 columns. Okay, so just keep in mind, I should end up with 6 columns. And then that's your table done. And then you're going to make a graph of this. You don't have to make it from scratch. It's very simple. You're going to select your data column that you want to populate on the x-axis, and you're going to select, and what I mean by data column is you're going to pick one of these, and then you're going to select your data column you want on the y-axis. Now, how do I determine? Do y'all hear my cat? I'll show him to y'all right now. So how do I determine which one to put on which? So it tells you. So using the graphing feature, place the fluid mass of trial 1 on the vertical. I wish they would just say y-axis, and then the volume on the horizontal. So that's what you're going to do. And then some follow-up questions. So this I leave all up to you, right? I don't want to give you the answers to that. But I'm glad we got that request about how do we actually graph and record the data. So questions on recording that data? No. Just know you have to have those 6 columns. Take note, right, of what that graduated cylinder weighs. So for example, that one, I would say for liquid 2, graduated cylinder is 84.6. Write that down somewhere because you're going to need it for this formula 1. Oh, and if you need a more detailed video or more detailed instructions on how to use that column formula again, this video shows you once again how to do that. So shows you how to do that. And it's right here, see how, on the change column formula. It's pretty much what we went through, but